1942, North Africa. In the scorching heat of the Egyptian desert, amidst the crowded streets of Cairo, in a dark office located right beneath a brothel, history was being written in silence. The names of the men working in this office never appeared in any newspaper headlines. The medals they received were kept secret for decades, yet their work changed the course of World War II. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to this channel because there are many hidden stories here. If you watch this video until the end, you will learn the incredible story of the British unit that carried out history's greatest deception operation. How did a handful of men completely fool the German army? Ghost armies, fake tanks, double agents, and a magician. All of this is real, and this story laid the foundation for D-Day itself. If you're new to our channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications because here we tell the stories that history books skipped. Now let's go back to the dark days of 1940. Europe had fallen. Hitler's armies were sweeping across the continent at lightning speed. France had collapsed. Britain stood alone behind the English Channel. After the Dunkirk evacuation, even the British Isles themselves were under threat. Winston Churchill had taken office during his country's darkest hour, and the cards in his hand were extremely weak. But Churchill knew one thing very well. To defeat a numerically superior enemy, sometimes instead of fighting directly, you had to deceive them. This is exactly where one of history's least known but most effective military units emerged, A-Force. In December 1940, General Sir Archibald Wavell, Commander-in-Chief of British forces in the Middle East, summoned someone from London. This man's name was Colonel Dudley Clarke. Born in South Africa, he had served as a pilot in World War I and conducted intelligence operations during the Arab Revolt in Palestine. He was an experienced officer, but what made Clarke special was his perspective on warfare. He strongly believed that to defeat the enemy, you first had to deceive them. Wavell was one of the rare generals who shared this view. He had fought in Palestine under General Alamein during World War I and had personally witnessed how effective deception operations against Turkish forces could be. Now he wanted to apply the same tactics against the Germans and Italians. If this story interests you, subscribe. When Clarke arrived in Cairo on December 18, 1940, the situation he encountered was not good at all. British forces were vastly outnumbered. Posing a serious threat against the Italian army in North Africa seemed almost impossible. But Clarke's eyes were gleaming because he was a master at making things that didn't exist appear real. In his first days, Clarke literally worked in a bathroom. Yes, you heard that right. At British Army headquarters, in a converted bathroom, alone and in secrecy, he began his work. His official title was Special Duties Intelligence Officer attached to headquarters, which was a title that said nothing but covered everything. Clarke's first major project was to frighten the Italians with the fear of paratrooper attacks. Italian commanders believed the British had a large paratrooper unit stationed in Egypt. Clarke decided to exploit this fear. The problem was that no such unit actually existed, but it needed to exist, at least on paper. And so the first Special Air Service Brigade was born, a completely fictitious unit. Clarke created an incredible scenario to prove the existence of this ghost unit. 2 soldiers were dressed in paratrooper uniforms and paraded through the streets of Cairo, Port Said, and Alexandria. These soldiers, in bars and cafes, let slip information about secret operations planned for Crete or Libya, as if by accident. Photographs of the paratroopers were published in local newspapers. Fake training areas were set up in the desert with entry prohibited. Clarke even boarded a train with a known Japanese spy while wearing a badge that said "Airborne" on his uniform. All of this was done right before the enemy's intelligence. And it worked. German and Italian intelligence reports began mentioning the existence of a major paratrooper threat in Egypt. A unit that didn't exist was influencing the enemy's war plans. This success earned Clarke official authority and resources. On March 28, 1941, Advanced Headquarters A Force was officially established. Even the name was a deception. The letter A suggested the initial of Airborne, supporting the existence of the Ghost Paratrooper Unit. In reality, this unit was a secret organization that would manage all deception operations in the Middle East. On April 8, 1941, A Force moved to 6 Sharia Kasernil in central Cairo. The building had an interesting feature. A brothel operated on its upper floors. This was perfect for operational security because suspicious-looking people entering and leaving the building didn't attract attention. Everyone assumed these visitors were there for the brothel. Clarke carefully selected his team. Among them were intelligence officers, artists, engineers, and even a stage magician. What these men had in common was their creative thinking ability and the courage to challenge the rules. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe. So what exactly did A Force do? First, they perfected what is called order of battle deception. This meant misleading the enemy about the true strength of the forces they faced. They invented fake divisions and brigades. They gave these fictitious units realistic names, emblems, and battle orders. Radio traffic was simulated. False information was transmitted through double agents. As a result, German intelligence was made to believe that the British had far more military power than they actually possessed. Second, they conducted physical deception operations. They produced dummy tanks, fake aircraft, cardboard ships, and rubber artillery pieces. They placed these at strategic points in the desert. German reconnaissance aircraft believed these dummies were real. Third, they ran a double-agent network called Cheese. This network fed false information to German intelligence in a controlled manner. The Germans thought they were receiving information from reliable sources. In reality, everything had been carefully crafted by A Force. But Clarke's greatest genius was systematizing the fundamental principles of deception. The rules he established formed the foundation of all Allied deception operations for the rest of the war and even in subsequent years. First rule: deception must be built around a well-thought-out scenario. Random lies don't hold. The story must be consistent and believable. Second rule: the best deception is built on a plan that was actually considered but rejected. This way, the details become realistic. Third rule: make the enemy believe that the actual operation will occur later than planned. This buys time for preparation. Fourth rule: make the enemy believe that the real attack is just a feint. This way, they hold back their reserves. Fifth rule: large-scale strategic deceptions take time. They can take months. They require patience. These principles formed A Force's DNA, and this DNA would save lives during the most critical moments of World War II. By mid-1941, A Force had become a fully operational force, but their greatest tests had not yet begun. That summer, Crete fell. German paratroopers captured the island in one of history's boldest airborne operations. Now everyone had one question on their minds. Was Cyprus next? The British garrison in Cyprus was only 4,000 men. The island was even more vulnerable than Crete. If the Germans attacked, its fall was certain. This is where Clarke stepped in. If you can't actually defend the island, at least you can deter the enemy from attacking. And the way to do this was to make them believe the island was far more heavily defended than they thought. A Force created a fictitious 7th Infantry Division and deployed it to Cyprus. In reality, no such division existed. But there was radio traffic, there were fake documents, there were reports from double agents, and most importantly, there was enough evidence for German intelligence to believe in the division's existence. The result? The Germans never attacked Cyprus. The real reason was that airborne operations had caused very heavy casualties in Crete, and Hitler was now avoiding such risks. But we know from German documents that the perception of the island being heavily defended also played a role in this decision. This success proved how effective A-Force could be, and London took notice. Clarke was summoned to London in November 1941. He explained A-Force's work to high-ranking commanders. His presentation was so impressive that it was decided to establish a similar organization in England. This unit, established under the name London Controlling Section, would later plan the D-Day deceptions. But Clarke's story continued in Cairo, and his greatest test was approaching. 1942 was the most critical period of the North African campaign. Rommel's Africa Corps was advancing, and British forces were retreating. El Alamein was the last line of defense. If it fell, Egypt would fall. If Egypt fell, the Suez Canal would fall. And if Suez fell, the course of the war could change completely. At this critical moment, A-Force carried out history's greatest desert deception. But this story will continue in the second part. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button. In the comments, let us know which lesser-known stories of World War II you'd like to hear. And subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Because in the second part, I will tell you perhaps history's most incredible deception operation, Operation Bertram. How did a handful of British soldiers completely fool the desert fox Rommel? Fake pipelines, ghost tanks, and a magician. All of it is real. If you're curious, subscribe and let's get right into it. Welcome back everyone to the second part. We're continuing without slowing down. The summer of 1942 was like a disaster for the British Army in North Africa. Rommel's Africa Corps seemed unstoppable. Tobruk had fallen. 33,000 British soldiers had been taken prisoner. This was one of the greatest surrenders in British military history, and Winston Churchill referred to it as one of the heaviest blows of his life. British forces were forced to retreat all the way to the Egyptian border. The last line of defense was El Alamein. This narrow corridor stretching from the Mediterranean coast to the Qattara Depression was the final obstacle preventing Rommel from reaching Cairo and the Suez Canal. If El Alamein fell, Egypt would fall. If Egypt fell, the oil resources of the Middle East would be in danger, and this could change the fate of the war. In August 1942, a new commander arrived, General Bernard Montgomery. This short, sharp-eyed man known as Monty instilled absolute confidence in his soldiers. But Montgomery was not only brave, he was also extremely cautious. He wanted to achieve overwhelming superiority before attacking, and he was ready to try every method to surprise the enemy. This is where A-Force entered the stage of history. Montgomery's plan was this. The main attack would come from the north, along the coastal road and railway. But if they could convince Rommel to expect an attack in the south, German armored forces would wait in the wrong position and would be late to intervene when the real attack began. The code name for this deception operation was Bertram, and it would be recorded as the most complex, most comprehensive desert deception in history. The architect of Bertram was of course Dudley Clarke, but the man who brought the physical dimension of the operation to life was the Camouflage Directorate under Geoffrey Barkas's command. Most of those working in this unit had been artists, painters, set designers, or architects before the war. Now they were writing history in the desert sands. And among them was a magician, Jasper Maskelyne. The Maskelyne family was Britain's most famous dynasty of stage magicians. His grandfather, John Neville Maskelyne, had invented the levitation trick. His father, Neville, was also a famous illusionist. Jasper himself had made a name for himself with razor blade swallowing tricks on London stages before the war. When the war started, Maskelyne joined the army and offered to use his talents for military purposes. At first, no one took him seriously, but eventually he was sent to Cairo and became part of A Force. There is debate about exactly what Maskelyne did. According to his own accounts, he single-handedly made Alexandria harbor invisible and protected the Suez Canal from German bombardment. The truth is probably more modest, but what is certain is that Maskelyne and his team played an important role in Operation Bertram. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe. So how did Bertram work? Let's examine it step by step. First phase, hiding the real forces in the north. Montgomery's actual attack force was gathering in the north. Hundreds of tanks, thousands of vehicles, tons of ammunition and fuel. All of this needed to be hidden from German reconnaissance aircraft. The solution was a brilliant invention called sun shield. These were lightweight canvas and wooden structures placed on top of tanks. From above, a tank looked like an ordinary truck. During the day, tanks waited in this disguised state. At night, they moved to their real positions. But just hiding the tanks wasn't enough. They also needed to create the impression that there was no buildup in the north. For this, vehicles were parked in a scattered manner. Artillery batteries were hidden. Everything had to look like part of a normal defensive arrangement. Second phase, creating a fake army in the south. This is where the real magic began. In the south, in the Munasayab Depression area, a massive fake army was constructed. 1,300 fake trucks were placed. 300 fake tanks were built. These consisted of canvas and painted plywood stretched over wooden frames. From above, it was impossible to distinguish them from real vehicles. But the most impressive deception was the fake pipeline. A completely fake water pipeline 20 miles long was constructed. Beside it were fake pump stations and water tanks. Every day, construction crews extended this line by a few more miles. Why a pipeline? Because water is essential for a major military operation in the desert. If the British were building a pipeline in the south, it meant the attack would come from the south. And the construction speed of the pipeline indicated when the attack would begin. A Force deliberately kept the construction speed slow. The pipeline was progressing only a few miles per day. At this rate, it could be completed at the earliest by early November. Therefore, the Germans thought the attack wouldn't come before November. In reality, Montgomery planned to attack on October 23rd. Third phase. Radio deception. Physical deception alone wasn't enough. The Germans were monitoring British radio traffic and could determine unit positions from radio signals. This radio deception, called Operation Canwell, supported the existence of the fictional units in the South. Fake radio messages were sent. Non-existent communications took place between non-existent units. The real units in the north maintained radio silence. German signals intelligence detected intense military activity in the south. In the north, there was silence. This was more evidence that the attack would come from the south. Fourth phase, double agents. A Force's cheese network was feeding false information to German intelligence in a controlled manner. These agents talked about the buildup in the south, the pipeline construction, and the attack plans for November. The Germans were receiving the same information from multiple sources. This increased confidence in the accuracy of the information. Fifth phase, psychological deception. This operation, called Operation Treatment, aimed to obscure the attack date. Rumors were spread. Sports events and social gatherings were planned in Cairo. An atmosphere was created as if nothing was going to happen. There were even rumors that Montgomery would attend a conference in Tehran in November. If the commander was leaving the city, an attack couldn't be planned soon, right? And then came the masterstroke that brought everything together. In mid-October, 3.5 regiments of fake artillery were placed in the Munasib Depression. But these fake guns were carefully, poorly hidden. That is, they wanted German reconnaissance aircraft to discover them. As days passed, maintenance of these fake guns was deliberately neglected. Camouflage covers became disheveled. Positions appeared abandoned. The Germans decided these were dummies. The British are trying to fool us, but did we fall for it, they thought. That's exactly what they were meant to think. Because when the battle started, these fake guns would be replaced with real guns overnight, and the next day, these guns remained completely motionless, as if they were still dummies. If you're enjoying this story, like and subscribe. When German tanks attacked Munasib, they were shocked when the dummy guns opened fire. This tactic caught the enemy both physically and psychologically unprepared, and it caused heavy attrition. So what was the result? On the night of October 23, 1942, when British artillery opened fire in the north, Rommel was in Germany. He had taken leave because he was ill. General George Stumme, who he left in charge, was certain the attack would come from the south. A significant portion of German armored forces had been sent south. During the first 4 days of the battle, the Germans hesitated to move their armored units north. What if this was a trap? What if the real attack was still coming from the south? This hesitation gave Montgomery the time he needed. When Rommel hurried back to Africa upon hearing the news, the battle had already begun, and German forces were in the wrong position. The Battle of El Alamein became one of the turning points of World War II. Rommel's Afrika Korps was decisively stopped and pushed back for the first time. In Churchill's words, "Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." And when Winston Churchill spoke in the House of Commons on November 11, 1942, he specifically mentioned Operation Bertram. By a marvelous system of camouflage, complete tactical surprise was achieved in the desert, he said. The 10th Corps, which he saw from the air exercising 50 miles in the rear, moved silently away in the night, leaving an exact simulacrum of its tanks where they had been, and proceeded to the battle stations.
The Prime Minister was praising the men who had fooled the enemy, but he didn't mention their names, because their work wasn't finished yet. German documents captured after El Alamein confirmed Bertram's success. An Italian map showed British forces in completely wrong locations. German intelligence summaries predicted that the main attack would come from the south, and the movement in the north would only be a diversionary attack. A captured German general had confessed that he expected the attack in the south. A force had succeeded in completely deceiving the enemy. But for Clarke and his team, El Alamein was just the beginning, because now a much bigger stage awaited them. The invasion of Europe. By the end of 1942, the Allies had begun to take control of North Africa. The next target was clear: Europe. But from where? Italy was the most logical choice geographically, and the road to Italy went through Sicily. The problem was this: Sicily was such an obvious target that, in Churchill's words, anyone but a fool would know that it's Sicily. The Germans knew too, and they were preparing to heavily fortify the island. This is where perhaps history's most famous deception operation came into play: Operation Mincemeat. The story of Mincemeat began like this. A corpse along with fake documents would be left off the coast of Spain. The documents would show that the Allies were targeting Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. The Germans would find the documents, believe them to be real, and mass their forces in the wrong places. The plan worked, because for years, a force had convinced German intelligence that Allied forces in the Mediterranean were far stronger than they actually were. Thanks to Operation Cascade, the Germans believed the Allies were strong enough to attack both Sicily and Greece simultaneously. The fake documents in Mincemeat confirmed this belief. If the Allies were this strong, why would they only attack Sicily? They could attack Greece too. Hitler believed the Mincemeat documents. He reinforced Greece instead of Sicily. The 1st Panzer Division was transferred from France to Thessaloniki. Additional units were sent to Sardinia. When the Allies landed on Sicily on July 9, 1943, the island was far less defended than expected. The campaign was completed in 38 days instead of the projected 90 days. Casualties were far below expectations, and a force's contribution didn't end there either. After the invasion of Sicily, the perception that the main attack was still aimed at the Balkans was maintained. The Germans continued to keep units in Greece instead of reinforcing their forces in Italy. A force expanded Operation Cascade, which they had started in 1942. In 1943, now there were non-existent divisions, corps, and even armies in the Mediterranean. German intelligence was overestimating Allied strength by 30 to 40%. These ghost armies affected German planning at every stage of the war. Generals were forced to allocate forces against non-existent threats. They couldn't establish sufficient defense everywhere because they saw everywhere as being under threat. And now, a force's greatest task was approaching. In early 1944, the Allies were planning history's largest amphibious landing to liberate Europe. Code name Overlord. Target: Normandy. A massive deception plan was created to support this operation, Operation Bodyguard. And who would manage the Mediterranean leg of this plan? A force, of course. But I'll tell this story in the third and final part. Now don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Which detail of the El Alamein deception surprised you the most? The fake pipeline, the dummy guns, or the poorly hidden fake artillery batteries? In the third part, I'll tell you how a force contributed to D-Day, the incredible story of Montgomery's double, and how this secret unit was forgotten after the war. If you're curious about the final and most exciting part, subscribe right now, and let's move on to the last part.
Welcome to the final part. We're continuing. It was the first months of 1944. Dark clouds were hovering over Europe, but this time there was something different in the air. Hope. Allied forces were no longer on the defensive. They were preparing to go on the offensive, and history's largest amphibious landing was being planned in secrecy. But there was a problem, actually a massive problem. Hitler knew the Allies would make a landing in Europe. The entire German General Staff knew. The question was where and when. If the Germans correctly guessed the location and timing of the landing, they could concentrate all their forces at that point, and Allied forces could be pushed back into the sea. Such a disaster could extend the war by years, perhaps even change its outcome. That's why there was an operation just as important as Overlord: Bodyguard, history's greatest military deception. Bodyguard's aim was simple, but its execution was incredibly complex: to completely mislead the Germans about the location and timing of the landing, to hide Normandy, to make Pas de Calais appear to be the real target, and most importantly, to make the Germans believe, even after the Normandy landing began, that it was just a diversion and the real attack would come from somewhere else. This plan consisted of several sub-operations. Fortitude North would create a fake threat to Norway. Fortitude South would build a fictional army aimed at Pas de Calais. And the Mediterranean leg? Operation Zeppelin. Who would manage this? Dudley Clarke and A-Force, of course. Zeppelin's mission was to keep the Germans tied down in the Mediterranean. If Hitler withdrew forces from southern France, the Balkans, or Greece and sent them to Normandy, the landing could be jeopardized. A-Force's job was to keep these forces in place, with ghost armies, with fake threats, and with an incredible web of deception. Clarke had been preparing for this moment for years. The fake order of battle that began with Operation Cascade would now reach its peak. In February 1944, Cascade gave way to Operation Wantage. The goal? To increase Allied forces in the Mediterranean by 33% on paper, to double the forces in the Middle East. Think about the numbers. In 1944, the actual Allied strength in the Mediterranean was approximately 52 divisions, but German intelligence believed there were 70 divisions, 18 ghost divisions, 6 ghost corps, 1 ghost army. None of them were real, but they were extremely real for German planners. How were these ghost forces created? First, each fake unit was given a realistic identity: name, number, emblem, commander, date of establishment, where it came from, current location. Every detail was carefully planned, because German intelligence cross-checked these details. One inconsistency could collapse the entire deception. Then came physical presence. Fake headquarters were established. Fake vehicles, fake tanks, and artillery were placed. These were positioned where German reconnaissance aircraft could see them. Radio traffic was critical. Each unit had its own radio fingerprint, the keying styles of radio operators, message formats, call signs. A-Force created fake radio traffic for fake units. German signals intelligence monitored this traffic and confirmed the unit's existence. And of course, double agents. A-Force's agent network in the Mediterranean was constantly feeding information to German intelligence. Troop movements, unit locations, commander changes, all controlled, all fabricated, but extremely valuable intelligence for the Germans. Zeppelin managed multiple fake threats simultaneously. First, the threat to the Balkans. The fictional British 12th Army appeared to be preparing an amphibious landing from North Africa to the Balkans, with support from Soviet ground forces from Albania, with Polish units joining from Italy. A completely fake scenario, but extremely convincing. How was this threat sold? Double agents sent reports to German controllers about troop movements. Fake forces were deployed in Libya and Italy. Colonel Victor Jones created both an armored division and an airborne division near Tobruk. Maps of Greece and Crete were purchased in bulk. Greek interpreters were hired. Reconnaissance flights intensified over target areas. All these activities sent a single message to German intelligence: the Allies are preparing to attack the Balkans. Second, the threat to southern France. Operation Vendetta created a fake landing threat to the Set region. The fictional American 31st Corps would supposedly carry out this attack. Its commander was even a real general, Terry de la M. Allen. Of course, Allen was training a division in Arizona at the time and had no idea about any of this. Vendetta continued even after the Normandy landing. The aim was to keep German forces in southern France for at least another 25 days, and the plan worked. Subscribe for this story. Third, the threat to the eastern Mediterranean. Operation Turpitude used visual deceptions along the Turkish border. The Royal Air Force conducted reconnaissance flights over target areas. The Navy established large facilities in Syrian ports. Anti-aircraft batteries, searchlights, everything that gave an impression of activity was set up. The small British 9th Army stationed in Syria was transformed into a massive force on paper. Alongside it were fictional Indian armored divisions and even fake tanks of non-existent armored brigades. All these threats were supported by diplomatic deception. Operation Royal Flush secretly requested support from neutral countries. Assistance was requested from Spain for the evacuation of wounded soldiers, as if a major operation was approaching. What was the result? Zeppelin achieved its main objective. Until D-Day and afterward, 60 German divisions were kept in the region from southern France to the Balkans. These divisions could have been sent to Normandy, but they weren't because the Germans had to be prepared for threats coming from the Mediterranean. 60 divisions. Think about what that number means. More than all Allied forces at Normandy. If even half of these divisions had been sent to France, the fate of the landing could have been very different. But Clarke's contribution to D-Day wasn't just Zeppelin, because Clarke's genius had also laid the foundation for deception operations on the British mainland. Fortitude was the most critical part of Bodyguard, and Fortitude's architects were men that Clarke had trained. Noel Wild had been sent from A-Force to London and played a key role in planning Fortitude. The techniques Clarke had perfected in Cairo were now being applied across Europe, and they were working. Creating fictional units, fake radio traffic, double agents, physical deception, all of these were methods A-Force had developed in North Africa. Now they were being used on a much larger scale. Fortitude South created history's most famous ghost army, FUSAG, 1st United States Army Group. Its commander was the Allied general the Germans feared and respected most, George S. Patton. Patton was going through the most difficult period of his military career at the time. He had fallen from grace for slapping 2 soldiers in Sicily. He had no active command, but the Germans saw him as the Allies' best general, and an army commanded by such a general had to be real. Fusag was entirely fictional. It was supposed to consist of 150,000 soldiers, but there wasn't a single real soldier, just inflatable tanks, fake headquarters, fake radio traffic, and reports from double agents. Spanish double agent Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, was the key figure in the Fusag deception. The Germans trusted him so much that even after D-Day, they believed Normandy was a diversion and the real attack would be made by Fusag at Pas-de-Calais. One of the messages Garbo sent to the Germans went down in history. On June 9, 1944, 3 days after the Normandy landing, Garbo informed German controllers that the Pas-de-Calais attack was still coming, and the Germans believed it. The 15th Army continued to wait at Pas-de-Calais. No reinforcements were sent to Normandy. This may have saved millions of lives. And where were the origins of Garbo's techniques? Cairo, A-Force, the double-agent operations that Dudley Clarke had pioneered. But Clarke had one more contribution to D-Day, and this was perhaps the strangest one. In January 1944, Clarke was in a cinema in Naples. He was watching a film called 5 Graves to Cairo. In the film, an actor was playing General Montgomery, and a crazy idea came to Clarke's mind. What if Montgomery had a double? What if this double appeared somewhere different while Montgomery was actually somewhere else? If the Germans saw Montgomery in the Mediterranean, they would think the landing wasn't imminent. This idea became Operation Copperhead. The first problem was finding a suitable double. The actor in the film, Miles Mander, was too tall. Other candidates were sought. One broke his leg in a motorcycle accident. Finally, Lieutenant Mayrick Edward Clifton James, serving in the Royal Army Pay Corps, was found. James had been a rather unsuccessful stage actor before the war, but his physical resemblance to Montgomery was striking. Short stature, sharp nose, characteristic mustache. With the right uniform, he was indistinguishable from the real thing. Of course, there were some problems. James had lost a finger in World War I. Montgomery had all 10 fingers intact. The solution? A prosthetic finger. A bigger problem: James drank and smoked. Montgomery strictly abstained from alcohol and cigarettes. James had to give up these habits, at least for the duration of the mission, and he did. There was also the flying problem. James had never flown before. What if he got airsick? Dennis Wheatley, one of the writers from the London controlling section, took James on a test flight. Fortunately, there was no problem. Preparations were completed. James spent a few days with Montgomery disguised as a journalist. He studied the general's walk, speaking style, and hand gestures. He learned Montgomery's clipped, questioning way of speaking, his restless and dominant walk, his authoritarian relationship with subordinates. On May 26, 1944, 11 days before D-Day, James boarded a plane at RAF Northolt in Montgomery's uniform and flew to Gibraltar. Gibraltar Airport was visible from the Spanish border, and just beyond the border were German observation posts. When James got off the plane, German agents were watching him. Montgomery was taken to the governor's residence. He waved along the way. An official welcoming ceremony was held. Everything was staged for German observers to see. The next day, James flew to Algiers. He was again greeted with ceremony at the airport. He was driven to meet General Maitland Wilson. Supposedly, they would discuss southern France operations. In reality, James was taken directly by A-Force's Rex Hamer to a remote villa, and there he was hidden. Why was he pulled from the stage so quickly? According to rumors, James had been seen smoking and wandering around drunk in Algiers. Anyone who knew Montgomery didn't drink or smoke could become suspicious. The deceivers didn't want to take the risk. James remained hidden in Cairo until D-Day. Meanwhile, double agents maintained the impression that Montgomery was still in the Mediterranean for a few more days. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Copperhead's impact is debatable. German agents reported Montgomery's visit. Some high-ranking commanders received this information, but how much it affected German planning is not clear. Still, this operation was a perfect example of A-Force's creativity. A stage actor had impersonated one of history's most famous generals, and for at least a few days, he had kept German intelligence occupied. James wrote a book after the war called I Was Monty's Double. In 1958, the book was adapted into a film, and James played both himself and Montgomery. The role of his life had truly become the role of his life. Montgomery said after James's death, "He did a very useful job during a very dark period of the war. What he did completely fooled the Germans." Now let's go to the final months of the war. D-Day had been successful. The Allies had established a solid bridgehead in France, but the war wasn't over yet, and A-Force continued to work in the Mediterranean. In August 1944, the Allies landed in southern France with Operation Dragoon. The fake threats Zeppelin had created had supported this operation too. German forces were scattered throughout the Mediterranean. The defense in southern France was much weaker than it should have been. The Italian campaign continued. A-Force was disrupting German planning there, too, with fake units and deception operations. Anzio, Salerno, Monte Cassino. Behind every major operation, there was A-Force's hidden hand. And then, in May 1945, the war in Europe ended. Dudley Clarke managed the orderly dissolution of A-Force. Documents accumulated over years, fake emblems, fake maps, fake orders, all were archived or destroyed. Clarke was given the task of writing A-Force's official history. He worked for months. He documented every operation, every success, every failure. But this history was never published. It was decided to keep it secret. Until the 1970s, no one could see these documents. In 1947, Clarke retired from the Army with the rank of Brigadier. He worked for the Conservative Party. He served on the board of a security company called Securicorps. He wrote 2 history books and a thriller novel. But he never talked about his real work, about A-Force. He couldn't. It was still secret. In 1953, he requested permission to write a book about deception operations. He was refused. On May 7, 1974, Dudley Wrangle Clarke passed away in London. He was 75 years old. The Times newspaper published a short 2-paragraph obituary. The death of one of history's greatest deceivers passed almost unnoticed. But a few weeks later, an anonymous letter was published in the newspaper. Those who had worked with Clarke couldn't remain silent. The letter said, "Those who served with him cannot allow the death of the man who ran the most secret of secret organizations in Cairo during the Second World War to pass in silence." This was one of the most sincere tributes Clarke received. Anonymous, secret, just like his entire career. So what is A-Force's legacy? First, they laid the foundations of modern military deception. The principles Clarke developed are still valid today, telling a consistent story, feeding what the enemy already wants to believe, using multiple channels, mixing real information with fake information, being patient. Second, they proved the importance of strategic deception. Alamein, Sicily, D-Day. At the war's turning points, deception operations played vital roles. Countless lives were saved. The war was perhaps shortened by years. Third, They inspired future operations of British and American intelligence services. During the Cold War, A-Force's techniques were developed and applied. Even today, psychological operations and information warfare are built on Clarke's legacy. But perhaps the most important legacy is the story of the nameless heroes. Most of the men who served in A-Force couldn't talk about their work for the rest of their lives. They couldn't even tell their families. Their medals remained secret. Their praises remained silent. These men won their brightest victories in the shadows. They fooled the enemy, changed the war, and then quietly blended into the background of history. Dudley Clarke had summarized A-Force's spirit in one sentence: "The best deception is the deception where no one realizes they've been deceived." And perhaps this was their greatest deception: to change history and then ignore that change. Now, as I finish this three-part series, I want to leave you with a few thoughts. World War II is usually remembered for great battles, famous generals, and heroic last charges. But it wasn't just weapons that won the war. Intelligence, creativity, and courage were just as important as weapons. A-Force is living proof of this truth. A handful of men with the right ideas and incredible courage accomplished things millions of soldiers couldn't. They made the enemy unable to believe even what they saw with their own eyes and heard with their own ears. And while doing this, they expected almost no recognition, because by the nature of their work, their successes had to remain secret forever. Thank you for watching this video series. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. This helps our channel grow and tell more lesser-known history stories. In the comments, I'm especially curious, which A-Force operation impressed you the most? The fake pipeline at El Alamein, Montgomery's double, or the ghost armies supporting D-Day? And in the next video, I'll tell another lesser-known story from World War II. This time, we'll dive into the dark world of submarines. I'll tell the secret war that British and American sailors waged against German U-boats in the icy waters of the Atlantic. Code breakers, deception tactics, and incredible stories of courage. If you don't want to miss this story, subscribe now and turn on the notification bell. History is not just the story of big names. Sometimes the most important stories are written in the shadows, and on this channel, we'll continue to shine a light on those shadows. See you in the next video. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye. And finally, let's end with Dudley Clarke's words. Deception in war is making the enemy believe in their own defeat. You present them with a false reality, and they act according to that reality. While you win the war, they're still trying to understand which war they lost. A-Force did exactly that, and the world owes them a great deal.